Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Tuesday, October 25th, 2022. I'm your host, George Kerr. Tyler Snyder will not be with us this week, but I got the newlywed himself, Cody Roadcap, in the house. Number one, Cody, congrats this weekend.
Thank you.
And number two, how you feeling?
Tired from all the festivities, but feeling great. Excited to be back on the podcast. I know I missed last week, and I'll be missing the next couple episodes, so excited to be back on talking football with you.
Yes, I'm going to miss you here for our next three episodes. I will have a special guest with me on Thursday, so make sure you check it out. I should say for our Friday show, we record on a Thursday, just like we record this on a Monday before Monday Night Football. But make sure you're checking that out, and then it'll be Tyler and I next week. On the show today, we're going to be covering some NFL news and notes, and there was a lot that happened, even right after the show was recorded last week. We're going to hit some quotes of the week. We're going to dive into the Week 8 waiver wire, and it is the midpoint of fantasy regular season, so we're going to give some fantasy midseason awards out, and we're going to preview Thursday Night Football for Week 8, which is a battle between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Baltimore Ravens. Make sure you find us on thecouchgms.com and our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at The Couch GMs, and join our Discord chat. The link is in the description of the video or podcast you are watching or listening to. All right, let's just jump right in here to NFL news. Starting off NFL news with that news I mentioned that broke right after we hit the stop button on our record on our last episode. Christian McCaffrey has officially been traded to the San Francisco 49ers. So in the trade, the 49ers got, of course, Christian McCaffrey. The Panthers got in return a 2023 second, third, and fourth round draft pick and a fifth round draft pick in 2024. So a pretty big haul when I heard some of the other teams were offering a single third, a single second. Like, that's a pretty big haul of picks that you would probably say add up to a first and change.
Yeah, they definitely got really good value out of it. And what's interesting to me, though, is does McCaffrey answer any of the questions we have about the 49ers running backs? Like, we know Kyle Shanahan still loves Jeff Wilson. Will he still be heavily involved? Like, how much does this affect Christian McCaffrey, or do we finally see the 49ers go to a quote-unquote lead backfield? I know he only had 7.2 points fantasy-wise and half-point PPR. His debut, now that was a few days in the building, limited snacks. You could literally see them telling him, you run this route or we're running to the left in the huddle. So he has to get up to speed. But also with that said, the 49ers, if you look back just over the last 2 years, in 2021, they traded up from the fourth to the third round to draft Trey Sermon. Then they followed that up in the sixth round by drafting Elijah Mitchell. Then this year in the draft in the third round, they drafted Tyrion Davis-Prince. And now they traded a second, third, fourth, and a fifth for Christian McCaffrey. So that is a lot of draft capital being invested into the running backs. And in terms of fantasy, we're still not even 100% sure that, like, McCaffrey's obviously going to be the leader, but is he going to be the Christian McCaffrey that we were hoping for when we drafted him 1, 2, or 3 overall to start the season?
I'll say there's this very interesting dynamic when it comes to the 49ers where it's always like they want to be in a committee. They always use committee backs, but there's always been the one guy that has shined. Like, it was Eli Mitchell majority of last season and the beginning of this season. It's been Jeff Wilson since. Other guys are getting a couple of carries. Like, I don't see how it's not Christian McCaffrey for 90% of your fantasy points out of that backfield once he's up to speed. Like, it really hurts if you're somebody who is relying on Jeff Wilson through these weeks, if you're somebody that was sitting on Elijah Mitchell and waiting for that pick to finally pay off. But I think it's going to be Christian McCaffrey, and that's it for the foreseeable future unless something happens.
Yeah, I think it's going to get real interesting once Elijah Mitchell comes back, because they seem to really like him. He's looked well since he's came in. Is he a guy that could potentially get moved now? They can recruit some of those draft picks? That's something we'll have to pay closer attention to as we approach the NFL trade deadline. But probably the shocker of the week so far has been Matt Ryan is being benched for second or third year player Sam Ellinger. I can't remember the exact year he came out, and I don't have it in front of me. Now, Matt Ryan does have a shoulder injury, but it seems like this move was coming regardless of the injury. And George, my question for you, is it a little too late for this to happen?
I honestly, because of the fact that we're shocked, think it's a little early for it to happen. Like, this team was expected to be a contender. They brought in Matt Ryan. I know we talked about all the band-aid the position BS, and we can let that go now. But to try to win them that title while they had this window. And now they're giving up on it after what admittedly a slow start, but and it's almost like they're going to jump into rebuild mode. They don't have a roster. I don't think that they're going to go out and start selling. They're not some team that's really necessarily full of all these young guys that are going to have the opportunity to build for a championship for the next 3 years. I honestly think if they were going to go ahead and bench Matt Ryan, it would have made more sense for them to go to Nick Foles. And I don't think that was a good move, as much as I have been, impacted by Nick Foles and a fan of him. Like, I don't think this makes sense at this point. I think they should have waited longer. And then maybe when they were like that very minuscule chance of a playoff spot or completely eliminated from the playoffs, then go to Ellinger and see what you have for the future.
Yeah, I think that's, a valid point, but they did just lose to the Titans for a second time. So now they'll, besides their record, they'd have to, get essentially 3 games up on the Titans at this point with 10 games to go. It's kind of a tough task, but we'll have to wait and see. And maybe the Colts will be in play for a foundational quarterback at the end of this year. And they're just going to, their offensive line isn't very good. Jonathan Taylor's been battling some injuries. Maybe they're going to take a step back and reevaluate how their team looks in the next coming weeks and, give the young guy a shot. It's something we've also been claiming for is like, why are you keep going? Like Nick Foles next in line is the same thing we've been complaining about. At least this is a young guy that
Yeah.
they can see what happens. We're not expecting a lot from him, but maybe he'll surprise, and at least it's something different in Indianapolis.
It's very true. At least they are going to the young guy when it comes to giving him a shot to be the next up in future years, because they are going to be definitely in the need for a young quarterback, not even a new quarterback. I'm not going to say it anymore. They better not go out there and try to trade for another veteran. A young quarterback they need. They have never recovered from the retirement of Andrew Luck, and it's just showing now how many years down the road. But another quarterback change that I think it's kind of an earned job here at this point, but the team is obviously selling. The Carolina Panthers said that they will start PJ Walker this week in week 8, regardless of Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold's injury statuses. So obviously he goes out there, gets him a win right after they traded Christian McCaffrey. They're going to probably keep moving pieces. I would not be shocked if DJ Moore is on the move in the next few weeks. I'm not entirely sure what their defensive pieces look like when it comes to do they want to keep young guys, move some veterans, but PJ Walker seems to have earned his shot at trying to win some more games and be the next in line at quarterback there in Carolina.
And I think earned is the right word. He deserves it after he helped them demolish. I think that's a good word. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, congrats to PJ Walker and getting this start. It wasn't like Baker and Darnold had huge leads on this job. We were just waiting for them to come back. They were in a competition all offseason. You have to think PJ Walker did get some reps as well, and he has looked good in his limited opportunities. So hopefully that continues. But unfortunately, now we have to talk about some injury news. And the first one is rookie sensation helping lead the Jets to a 5-2 record. Running back Breece Hall is out for the season with a torn ACL.
Actually, as we're talking, big trade news. The Jets are acquiring James Robinson from the Jacksonville Jaguars to help fill that void. That was actually completely perfect timing. We did not plan that. But now we can tie this into the Breece Hall news. The Jets, we thought we were just going to be left with Michael Carter, adding in James Robinson to the mix now too.
Yeah, I mean that's so weird how that timing worked. But yeah, so first of all, super unfortunate for Breece Hall. He was dominating. He looked like the reason he was the number 1 pick in dynasty rookie drafts. Breece Hall, he lived up to the expectations. He was running back 6 on the year. He had a 60+ yard touchdown before tearing his ACL. He was a rising star. So hopefully he has a quick and speedy recovery. But now let's talk about the trade real quick before we get into the rest of the injury news. James Robinson looked really good to start the season. He's slowing up a little bit. They're trying to get Travis Etienne more involved. And honestly, I think this is best for both situations. not Brees Hall, obviously, but making the best of most situations
Yep.
now, we get to see Travis Etienne in a full-time role, and then James Robinson, he gets to go, play with he'll have Michael Carter behind him, but their play styles are still different enough, and they still like to get them both involved, that Michael Carter doesn't have to now step up and be the full-time bell cow. They can use James Robinson as more of a relief, more of the power back. I expect him to be some of the goal line work. Um, so not he probably won't have the same potential output as a guy like Brees Hall, but I do think it's a good move for the Jets. And the compensation has not yet been released. Hopefully, we can get an update of that before we go off the air with this episode.
And I think it's important to note that it hasn't been that way in recent weeks. But Michael Carter was used a lot in the passing game the first 2-3 weeks of the season. I don't know if it was just game script for the Jets at that point, but he's proven he can be used in that way. And James Robinson is your traditional power run goal line kind of back. They actually can be complementary, even if that might not be like the top skill of Michael Carter's game. It's a really good move for them, and it sets them up to continue this run that they're going on where they're actually a playoff contender. So I really do like the move for both sides. And then when it comes to the Travis Etienne side of it for the Jags, big stock up for him right now because he was already getting majority of the carries. Like James Robinson did not actually get a carry this past week, but now there's not really anyone in that backfield to threaten taking him away from him.
Yeah, and we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But let's backtrack to more injury news. Two wide receivers that both got paid this offseason. We don't know if they're going to hit the 4-week IR, if they're going to be able to just recover on their own time. But we're talking DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. He has a knee injury that will not require surgery, but he will miss time. And Mike Williams has a high ankle sprain, which he will miss time, and they're saying weeks, not days. So if I had to guess right now, I think Mike Williams is a little bit more likely to hit the IR, but we'll have to see about both of those. And then two guys that have been, Mike Williams has been pretty solid for fantasy with the absence of Keenan Allen, who did come back this week. And then DK Metcalf has been not as consistent, but Tyler Lockett has been and him have been doing pretty well for, a pretty good Seattle Seahawks team that I don't think any of us saw coming.
Definitely. And we have to kind of keep an eye out on some of the next in line in both of those situations. We'll probably be talking about a little bit of that when we get to our waiver wire column here in the next few minutes. But big blow for both teams and for anyone in fantasy who has them both, maybe even bigger for Mike Williams. But I did expect Mike Williams to take a bit of a step back, like you said, with Keenan Allen starting to get back into it. But I didn't expect, obviously, this. So this kind of does hurt.
For sure. And another one that does hurt is all the owners out there that waited for J.K. Dobbins to return, and he is headed back to the IR. Now, if you have him, you know that he went on the IR after we recorded last week, so he has already missed one of the 4 games that he is required to miss. He's expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks after getting his knee scoped. Gus Edwards was able to come back and did find the end zone twice this past week, so that's a name to keep an eye on. They still have Kenyon Drake. So Baltimore should be fine with the running backs, just figuring out which one of the guys you want to play which week.
Exactly. And I mean, I hope it ends up being a clear cut that it's Gus Edwards. And again, we'll talk more about that when we get to waivers, but they have the talent and the depth there. It's just figuring out how it's going to go week to week, like Cody said. And then there's 3 other more minor injuries I just wanted to hit here before we get out of news. Deebo Samuel is considered day-to-day with a hamstring injury. He did not ever leave their game on Sunday, and no one knew about the injury until Monday. But it is something to watch as we go through the practice reports and into next week. It does appear that he may play, but they may rest him with a bye coming up in week 9. I think that's the biggest scary part about the whole thing. Amon-Ra St. Brown left the game in week 7 with a concussion. He has technically passed the first wave of concussion protocol on Monday, so it sounds like he is maybe a victim of that tighter concussion protocol and might come back to play in week 8. But we have to wait and see if that works out. And then Chuba Hubbard, who was named the starter for the Panthers in place of Christian McCaffrey, he left the game in the 4th quarter with an ankle injury. They said he could have returned in week 7 if necessary, but they just wrote with Dante Foreman, and he is not expected to miss any time.
Yeah, just to clarify too, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Dan Campbell did say on Monday he actually did not suffer a concussion. But because he showed signs, he was pulled for a quote unquote concussion based on the new rules we have seen since the Tua situation. And then we are getting the compensation reports in on the James Robinson trade. It is a conditional 6th-round pick that could be a 5th-rounder, so not a lot in the terms of draft capital. So again, hitting on that great move for both teams. But George, I think that should wrap up NFL news, and let's jump into your favorite segment, Quotes of the Week.
I think we have two sides of the story here on Quotes of the Week. We're going to start with a team that's on the struggle and then another team that's kind of bouncing back. So the team that's struggling is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and post-game head coach Todd Bowles said, "We're not playing well as individuals. We're not playing well as a team. We're not coaching well. All the way around, not scoring enough on offense, not stopping them enough on defense. As a result, we have to wear this on our sleeve. We've got to be grown men, and we're going to see what we're made of. How many people can handle diversity? It's about as dark as it's going to be right now." That last line's where I kind of want to hold because that was also the headline. That is a coach definitely trying to instill in his team that this is rock bottom. It's going to get better. We just got to work. But they're not showing any signs of starting to climb back to life at this point. So we'll have to see if that is inspirational enough to get the team going.
Yeah, and I think there is some truth to it too, though. Like it can be as dark it is right now, and there is still time to recover. Now, George, as an Eagles fan, probably thinks his Eagles are going to dominate the NFC all the way to the Super Bowl, which the way they're playing is super understandable. However, if you look at the last year Final Four in the NFC, they are all 3-4, except the Rams, who are 3-3, who just had their bye. Uh, so, or they've already had their bye. So we're talking about teams that we expect to be there at the end that are all 500 or worse right now. So the NFC is still wide open. I mean, outside the Eagles who have it on lock, the Giants, they're right up there. The Cowboys are looking good, but you've even mentioned it. The NFC East really hasn't played each other yet. So they're going to go through some gauntlets, and someone is going to have to lose some games. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And I know
Let
Tom
me just
Brady,
say, like, to add on to that, sorry, there are
go ahead.
literally only 3, 4. Sorry, I had the number. 5 teams in the NFC that are above 500. Only 5. And 3 of them are in the NFC East. So, like you said, yeah, like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 3-4 and it looks bad. They're technically tied for the lead in the NFC South with the Atlanta Falcons. If you ask me which team's more talented, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Atlanta Falcons, it's landslide Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, yeah, it's still wide open.
Yeah, and I think Todd Bowles sentiments could be said for the same thing. Like I mentioned, the Rams, the Packers, the 49ers, teams that were like, okay, you just got to find your groove. It's a new season. It's a weird season in the NFL right now, but we expect them to turn it around. But let's talk about Tyler Boyd for a team that seems to be turning it around as we speak. As they were also 500 entering the week, but Tyler Boyd was speaking on the Bengals offense, and he said, "No defense in the league, or whatever you do." Am I reading this right? No
Yep.
defense in the league or whatever you
He said it a
do.
little weird.
Okay. Okay. So he said it like how I talk. So I'll keep reading. So no defense in the league or whatever you do that can stop what we got. We got a great quarterback that can always make the right read every single time and make our jobs easy. And we saw it. The Bengals, they beat the Atlanta Falcons. They put up 35 points this week. Jamar Chase got heavily involved. Tyler Boyd had a big play. T. Higgins is getting involved. Like they're starting to use all their weapons again. And it does seem like they are getting more and more, you know, Zach Taylor is always going to be a run guy. Like he always wants to run the ball, and they have Joe Mixon, so you understand it. But it does seem like they're like realizing, okay, there is still some, despite the money, some deficiencies across our offensive line. So we're going to move away from trying to be like a run team and then a big play action deep shot guy. Like let's run these slants, let's run these quick outs, let's get the balls into the wide receiver's hands and see what they can do with it. And if they keep doing that, they keep Joe Burrow upright, the Bengals could be a team that can make a run here as the season winds down.
The AFC is a much different gauntlet than the NFC is right now. Even though they have a lot of teams hovering around 500 too, the entire league's just been kind of that way. There's so many more powerhouses in the AFC than the NFC, so it's going to be tougher for them. But the turnaround this team has made from that week one where Joe Burrow threw, I think it was 3 interceptions in one half, to now this week having a full fantasy output in one half is absolutely crazy. And I have no doubt they're going to keep that up. The Super Bowl team from last year. So we'll have to see how that keeps going. But I think people are here for fantasy. So why don't we jump into the week 8 waiver wire? And I think between bye weeks and the fact that we've kind of hit that midpoint of the season where all the lines in the sand are starting to be drawn, the waiver wire is going to get a little bit thinner. We're not going to have as many guys that I'm not highlighting that we're going to talk about, but we can dive even more into some of the guys that I mentioned in the waiver wire article on the couchgms.com on the show here. So I'll just give a quick rundown of who I have in there, and then we can just kind of break it down, whoever we'd like to talk about. So at the quarterback position, I have a streamer of Daniel Jones this week. He's got Seattle, who's been a very mediocre defense. We talked a little earlier about the Baltimore running back situation. Gus Edwards is only 10% owned, and he had 2 touchdowns this week, so that's definitely someone to go take a look at off the wire. The duo of Carolina running backs now with Chuba Hubbard and Dante Foreman, who both had really good performances in their first game without CMC. Isaiah Pacheco, who was named the starter for Kansas City, even though he ended up not scoring as much as Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We're just going to ignore that. But there is a bye in Kansas City this week, so we have a little bit of time to see how that works out in the long run. The wide receivers, I have 3 of them. George Pickens, who's someone you should probably already have, but he's still under 50% owned. Marquise Goodwin, who stepped in for DK Metcalf, who actually looked pretty good in his first real action since 2019, I want to say. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, who's somebody we talked about last week that I just wanted to throw out there. Like, he's going to start getting used in that Giants offense. And then the man who Tyler would like to make fun of Cody for, Taysom Hill, who just keeps getting involved in the offense, either throwing or running or catching the ball, and is still under 50% owned, but is a top 10 tight end. So here we are.
Yeah. And the tight end position is awful. So
yeah,
why not just play Taysom Hill? Because you at least know I feel more confident in Taysom Hill getting a touchdown each week on 2 opportunities than I do most of the tight ends in the league getting a touchdown each week, just because that's how bad they've been, unfortunately, for fantasy. The one name I do want to circle back to that you mentioned is Isaiah Pacheco. And this is also where we talk about in fantasy, you have to make moves to win, but you also have to know when the right time to make moves is. So if there's not one of these guys that you're desperately in need of and you have a higher waiver priority or you don't want to spend the fab or anything like that, wait and see, because Pacheco is on bye. And he is, he was named the starter, but he was still had less points than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He is not a guaranteed to stay on the roster through the bye type of player at this point. So if you are a team that can stash him or wait until later in the week, and if you have to worry about someone else on injury news and then that guy's going to play and you can cut the backup you don't need anymore, Isaiah Pacheco is a name to see if he gets cut this week. That percentage might actually go down a little bit because he is on bye and that you can pick him up. So we'll probably talk about him again next week, but we talk about it all the time. Make sure you get ahead of the waiver wire, and Pacheco is a great person to do that with this week.
To the point of him getting cut, I actually made a point in the article about Taysom Hill, if we're going to try to tie the 2 together again. He had 9 points this week. He had obviously some passing yards. He only had, I think, 1 carry, but he still put together something solid because he got a touchdown. And he was actually trending downward in own percentage. I think because people wanted that 30-point week that they got 2 weeks ago from Taysom Hill. And when they don't see that, they're just going to jump ship. And obviously the tight end position is so volatile, Taysom Hill is still worth owning. But Isaiah Pacheco, like you said, he was named the starter, then scored less than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. People might be like, bye week, this guy's a fraud, get rid of him. It's very possible when he is still worth owning because he's going to get valuable carries in a solid offense. So it is very possible. You can't just go out there and discount like, he's not going to get dropped. He really might.
Yeah, and I think there's also, we have a couple other names that they traditionally don't make the waiver wire article because they're over 50% owned. But there's some names we have to keep an eye out. DJ Moore, he came alive with PJ Walker this week. I think that's part of the reason they're going to keep, they were on the brink of potentially trading him, and then he came alive with PJ Walker. I think that's part of the reason PJ Walker is keeping his job. He is 68% owned, but that means in 32% of leagues, he's still available. Running back Michael Carter. If he becomes available, because people are jumping ship now that, one, Brees Hall got hurt, but now they just traded for James Robinson. Like we said, he was still heavily involved. He was still a big part of the passing game. His number could come down as well. It's people like, oh, they traded for James Robinson. I don't need Michael Carter anymore. Keep an eye out for him. Jimmy Garoppolo, he's playing pretty well as, an interesting quarterback streamer in positive matchups. He's at 53% too, so that's another name to keep an eye on. But George, I'll let you talk about the last guy to keep your eye on, because I think he's been one of your favorites all season.
Talking Raheem Mostert?
I am.
So I actually just saw Raheem Mostert get traded in our league of record, and I thought it was interesting because I didn't think he really carried any value. But I think that when you look at people who follow fantasy, they're kind of on the same boat as me, where they see Raheem Mostert really starting to gather some traction. And he put up yet another great week this week. I believe he broke 20 in half PPR, and he is still dominating carries in Miami. Miami, we really don't think of as a running back team for fantasy because not only do they have so many weapons in the passing game, but they were just so frustrating last year. No matter who they put out there, where they added them off the waiver wire, they had their stable of 4 backs from the beginning of the season. They were bad. This is not the same Miami team as last year. And he's also eating up touchdowns, which is not something Raheem Mostert used to do in San Francisco even. He was never really thought of as that goal line red zone kind of running back, but he's doing it right now. And I had to put him on here even though he's almost 80% owned because he's starting to trend into running back 2 territory every single week, and that needs to be more like a 95% owned range right now.
Yeah, and I think this is also a good point. We're not doing buy and sell like we normally do. We're swapping that out with fantasy awards, but he's still another guy that, you might want to buy low on if it's a team that's like, man, I just can't trust the Miami backfield, or you sell high on if somebody sees this and you can get, some better value out of it. So he's a guy that could be, become more and more a part of some different trades as we progress through the rest of the season, as the fantasy trade deadline and the NFL trade deadline are quickly approaching.
Definitely there. And I kind of want to defend the Jimmy Garoppolo thing just a little bit more. He is kind of more of your streamer in a good matchup. But when you look at how volatile the quarterback position's been, if you're somebody that went out there and punted the quarterback position like I did in our league of record, and now you're stuck with people like Matt Stafford, Tom Brady, if you went out there and grabbed a Jared Goff, even if you drafted a Trey Lance and ended up having in trouble there, it's been so hard to find a quarterback. He's going to go out there and score you semi-decent points every single week. And 2 guys that we have been kind of glazing over have been Daniel Jones, who I had as my number 1 streamer this week, but he's really only had 1 game under 10 points this whole entire season. His floor has been fantastic. And Jimmy Garoppolo is right up there too. Garoppolo doesn't look like it because he's listed as, I think he's quarterback 20 right now or something. But the man scores a floor of 13. He scores you 16 almost every single week. Occasionally he'll get you 19. That doesn't sound fantastic, but that's the kind of numbers that are going to be that guy who scores you 10. It's he's either going to, he's not going to hurt you or help you. He's just going to keep your team right on track. So that's why I like a Jimmy Garoppolo, especially if you're in a situation where you're really hurting at the quarterback position.
Awesome. And then, you're speaking quarterbacks, so I just have to gauge your interest. Sam Ehlinger. Any potential stream this week, a guy to keep an eye on. It's not the best matchup, but he does have the Raiders in 2 weeks, which is the worst ranked team against fantasy quarterbacks. So maybe we'll save him for next week when we talk about it and we get to see him play live. But just so you do know, he does play. I just refreshed my page. He plays the Patriots next week, who are number 18 against the. No, I lied. He plays Washington, who's 23, then New England, then the Raiders. So those are the next 3. So 3 positive matchups. Any interest in grabbing him now?
I don't like particularly keeping an extra roster spot for somebody that you're thinking of streaming at quarterback 3 weeks down the road. I've been in a situation before where my roster's not solid. I don't like anyone on the wire. Then I go ahead and do that. So if you're in a deep league and you have the extra roster spot, go ahead and take a flyer on him. Maybe you'll start him in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. I'm kind of just sitting back and watching, and maybe he'll be someone that ends up on the waiver wire article in the next few weeks as a potential streamer. Not completely discounting it. Really wouldn't go and add him unless you're in a unique situation.
All right. Thanks for the input, but let's jump into some fantasy midseason awards.
Yes, Cody, we're going to hit some fantasy midseason awards as you're listening to this, we're through week 7. It is the midpoint of the fantasy regular season. So we're going to hit, 5 awards here. We're going to talk MVP of the first half, as well as bounce back player, the biggest surprise, the biggest disappointment, and the biggest waiver wire pickup of the first 7 weeks of the fantasy season. And because it's always been the most popular award, why don't we start off with MVP? We have 4 nominees here for you. So the first nominee would be quarterback Josh Allen, who's currently QB1. Number 2 is Austin Eckler, who has been running back 1 after a semi-slow start. And we got Cooper Kupp, who is actually wide receiver 2 on the season so far. And then tight end 1 on the season so far, Travis Kelce. Cody, would you like to reveal our winner of the 4?
Yeah, and I will say Austin Eckler has been dominant enough to overtake RB1. So he is RB1 on the season
Yep.
After the last couple of weeks. And this one gave a lot of debate. Josh Allen has been spectacular. Granted, he's only played in 6 games, so there is a little bit of like how valuable is it in terms of whatnot. He's averaging 28 points a game. But when you look at a broad spectrum, our winner for midseason MVP is Travis Kelce from the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's not so much that, he's not putting up more fantasy points per game than Josh Allen. But he is putting up a lot of fantasy points, and the discrepancy between him and number 2 is, 4 points per fantasy or per game, and like 30, just under 30 total points. And then from 1 to 3 is, it's another 20 some points down. So there's just a lot of discrepancy, and he has been so valuable in a position that has been so, I don't even know how to describe how bad the tight ends have been this year. And then for the argument, for Josh Allen, he would have been the number 2 guy. But Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and you can even throw Jalen Hurts in there, have had well enough seasons that, again, taking the number 1 or the top fantasy quarterback and, getting a guy like Joe Burrow in the later rounds, or Jalen Hurts, or, we go the next 2, Kyler Murray, or even Geno Smith off the waiver wire. Like, they're putting up not the exact same numbers, but numbers that are close enough that don't make him as valuable as a guy like Travis Kelce does for his position group.
I agree with you there. And I think the running backs have been bad also. But you can almost make the same exact argument for running backs. Eckler does have a bit more of a gap. He's at about 15 points on number 2, which is Nick Chubb. And then it kind of the gap starts to go away a little bit under that. But just the fact that you can get a tight end when people's tight ends are literally scoring 5 points a game. I'm sitting here in our league of record with Zach Ertz, and it's been amazing. He's tight end 4, and he's averaging less than 10 points a game as tight end 4. So the fact that you got a tight end that's averaging, I think it's like 16, 17 points a game is such a huge boost. And that's why we've been drafting Travis Kelce this early for years. And that's why it's working out for you. And he is our mid fantasy regular season MVP. And we can move on then to bounce back player of the year. We have 4 nominees for this one as well. Number 1 is a man who came back from injury with Derrick Henry. And then another injury comeback for Saquon Barkley. Number 3 is Miles Sanders, who was banged up a little bit last year but failed to score a touchdown. And then the last one is a very interesting story. It's Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs we seemed like on the way out in Las Vegas after his season last year, and he has come back to really rally for a good season. So Barkley, Henry, Sanders, and Jacobs. Cody, who is our winner?
All right. Before I get to the winner, just so everyone is aware, through 7 games, Josh Jacobs already has had his bye. Josh Jacobs is RB4. Saquon Barkley is RB3. 3, Sanders also had his bye, and he is RB13. And the last one on the list, Derrick Henry, uh, again, had his bye. So a lot of these guys had their bye, and he is RB7. So if you average it out, fantasy points per game, they'd be a little bit higher in terms that Josh Jacobs would be number 2. But we're still going to go with Saquon Barkley as the guy. He has helped lead the Giants to a 5-1 record, and he is probably helping lead your team. You probably got him at the end of the second round, maybe even the beginning of the third, and you are getting a top 5 pick return and investment. And he's a guy that we project to have, a stronger second half. I mean, Josh Jacobs has looked phenomenal the last couple of weeks, but the Raiders are struggling too. So not that that played too much of a factor, but I do think Saquon Barkley's long-term outlook might give him just the final tipping point over a guy like Josh Jacobs.
Now, we are just talking bounce back player. We're trying not to put too much value into ADP into this kind of vote. But I feel like if we were putting ADP more into it, Miles Sanders, despite being running back 13 so far, would definitely have a huge boost because I know I mostly play on NFL.com and Yahoo. NFL.com still had him as, I think, a 5th to 6th round pick. Yahoo, you could go get Miles Sanders in round 10, and he's performing like a 2nd to 3rd round running back right now. So, like, the bounce back there is real. Same with Henry, who obviously only played like I think 4 games last year, but Saquon Barkley is definitely deserving because we're going back to seeing rookie year Saquon Barkley, the Saquon Barkley who you drafted and won you leagues how many years ago, and I was not expecting it, and I don't think anybody saw it coming. But props to Saquon Barkley for putting together this kind of season. But speaking of surprises, biggest surprise is next on our list here. First nominee for biggest surprise is Jags wide receiver Christian Kirk, who I think we knew was going to be a wide receiver one coming into the year, but he's actually a top 20 wide receiver right now through 7 weeks, which is a little bit shocking to me. We got Breece Hall here on the list, which, I mean, he put up a fantastic first half. We did kind of draft him a little higher than some of these guys, but we have to just mention how good of a first half he had before now. Obviously, he's going to miss the rest of the season. Josh Jacobs makes another appearance in biggest surprise, just to throw it right up there with what we were talking about. And then quarterback Geno Smith and the Seahawks in general are a big surprise. So he was our 4th nominee. Cody, who do we have as our winner of biggest surprise of the first half?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think this one as close, but I do want to give a shout out for Christian Kirk. People were like, I can't believe he got paid so much money, and he is currently wide receiver 10 in half point PPR. So he can continue to get that. The Jags are struggling, but he has still been a solid option for fantasy. But we're talking surprises, and this one is so clear, and that is quarterback 7. Yes, I said it, quarterback 7, Geno Smith of the Seattle Seahawks, which also last week I wasn't on the episode, so I don't know if you guys talked about it, but Pete Carroll was like, oh, Drew Lock is right on his heels. Like, there's still potential that he could lose this job. And I was like, I don't understand. He is balling out. So if they would make a quarterback switch, that would be an even bigger surprise. But Geno Smith has gone from a guy that people mocked, made fun of, like, why is he still in the league, to just balling out, doing his job. And, he has been accused of being a little bit of a game manager and stuff like that. But we saw a guy like Alex Smith. He was very good. He had a very strong fantasy seasons those last couple years with the Kansas City Chiefs. Not saying we're there quite yet with that same level of confidence in Geno Smith, but he is in a formula and in a system that could help, continue this, 7 to 15 quarterback we might see the rest of the season. So props to you, Geno Smith. Nobody saw this coming.
No, we did not. And then the other award that we didn't see coming would have to be our biggest disappointment. So we have 4 nominees for biggest disappointment. First off, consensus number 1 overall pick, Jonathan Taylor, which, I mean, you can argue he's had some decent games in there, but even when he has played due to injury, it's not been the prettiest. Travis Etienne, who now we may have some future bias, knowing that he is going to be a sole running back in that backfield, but he has been starting to pick back up as the season's gone on. Alvin Kamara, who I believe is still yet to score a touchdown. It makes the biggest disappointment nominees list, and he's still had some decent yardage output. He's doing all right. but it's not been the Alvin Kamara that we were expecting. And then big tight end Kyle Pitts, who was up there, is considered one of those tier 2 tight ends, like drafted between tight end 3 and 5. And he is, I think, only showed up to one, maybe 2 games so far this season. Biggest disappointment, Cody. Can you name our winner?
I can, and this one is a tough one. Between two guys, I think there all have been disappointments. Travis Etienne, we expected a lot out of him, but we always knew James Robinson was there. And remember, this is midseason, so it's not like we're projecting or what we think this is going to happen. So obviously, we're acknowledging that Travis Etienne could be in for a huge second half of the fantasy season now that he is the sole running back. Alvin Kamara, I think he gets knocked down a tier because not that we expected good things from him, but he was already drafting down the ADP because of his off the field issues. We were worried about all of that. Kyle Pitts is an interesting one. We gave Travis Kelce MVP because he was so valuable for tight end. Kyle Pitts is all the way down at tight end 21. And that's a guy we're talking about drafting in the third through fifth round. And that is extremely disappointing. But I think we have to give it to Jonathan Taylor. They are the number one consensus running back. Now, I will preface this. He has dealt with, an injury. He missed 2 games. He's only played in 5 games so far. He still is averaging 11.5 points per game. So it isn't, disappointing. Like, that's pretty good. That's a good fantasy output when he is played. But you don't draft him, that person, number 1 overall for 11.5 points a game. You want the Austin Eckler 21.2. You want the Saquon Barkley 18, the Josh Jacobs 20, the Christian McCaffrey 15, Breece Hall 15, Derrick Henry 17. Like, that is what you drafted him for, and only getting 11, plus you've missed him with 2 weeks in injury. Unfortunately, that means Jonathan Taylor is our biggest disappointment.
And I think Kyle Pitts would even get a little bit of a bigger boost if the tight end position was actually performing up to expectations. But the fact that he is drafted as a top 5 tight end and he's tight end 20 right now with all of the awful tight ends playing is kind of shocking. But that number 1 overall pick hurts way too much. Jonathan Taylor deserved that win, and not a win you want to deserve. But finally, one more pick, and it's because we talk fantasy, we have to talk best waiver wire pickup. And this one was a heck of a debate, actually, to come up with the winner. So obviously, we're going to try to look for last year's Eli Mitchell when we're looking for best waiver wire pickup, but there hasn't necessarily been anyone that has been that clear of a guy. Maybe someone who came close to that was Jeff Wilson, who, now we know he had 1 week behind CMC, and that's not looking good for the future, but he was never entirely a world beater. He still had his little ups and downs. Jamal Williams for the Detroit Lions is another one. He is a really top handcuff for DeAndre Swift. Swift has missed some time. Plus, Williams was still scoring some points when Swift was in the game. Kenneth Walker, who definitely started slow. He was actually inactive for the first 2 weeks, but as soon as Rashad Penny went down, he hit fire and ran with it. And then we kind of threw a guy on here with an asterisk that we have to kind of talk about if he's even eligible for this award, and that's Dameon Pierce. So if you drafted early on in the draft process, Dameon Pierce was undrafted. I know Cody's now wife got Dameon Pierce off of free agency in one of our leagues because we drafted at the beginning of August. Once you got towards right before the regular season, Dameon Pierce was going as high as round 2 and 3. So that would make him obviously not a waiver wire pickup. But if you got him off the waiver wire, it's been absolutely amazing for you. So, Cody, who was our winner of best waiver wire pickup?
Right, and I think we would have picked Dameon Pierce because, like you mentioned, if you drafted before the 3rd week of the preseason, you got him either super late or off the waiver wire, which congrats. But we're going to look at this more as in season. And I think that also why Kenneth Walker might get a little bit of a knockdown while he might be the best of them long term, because now the Rashad Penny, he was a top 10 pick until he got banged up in the preseason. It dropped a little bit, but his ADP finished around in the 90s. So he was still a top 100 fantasy pick. He did become available once he became inactive. Jeff Wilson, same thing. He struggled a little bit at the beginning as he was coming back from injury. Then Elijah Mitchell went down. He became the guy. But the guy we're going to give it to is Detroit Lions running back Jamal Williams. And this one was the toughest for us to determine. I think all three of us, because we did get Tyler's input, I think Tyler would have went Kenneth Walker. George was pounding the table for Jeff Wilson. I went Jamal Williams. I don't know if it was the boys being nice because I now have a wife, but they were like, okay, you can have this one. And maybe I sold them too because Jamal Williams had fantasy value starting week 1 with DeAndre Swift. Then DeAndre Swift went down and he was a bona fide starting wide receiver. Now, he did have that one dip against a very tough run defense before their bye, but Jamal Williams has played well. He has the touchdowns. He is a top 15 running back as we speak, and he's only played in 6 games. So Jamal Williams is our winner for best waiver wire pickup. Now, if Kenneth Walker is still out there or you got him, you're probably like, well, I think I'd rather have Kenneth Walker long term. But like I said, based on where he was drafted, he might have became available after the season started on how good Rashad Penny looked. But Jamal Williams has been, consistently the top waiver guy. He reminds me a lot of, maybe not to the same level because DeAndre Swift is still there, but a lot of like Cordarrelle Patterson, how we didn't want to ever play Cordarrelle Patterson, but week after week after week, Jamal Williams has put up fantasy points.
It has been a bit of a bumpy road him for sure, but I will say that through the first 7 weeks, Jeff Wilson, who I was pounding the table for, is running back 23. I believe that's actually through 6 weeks, my bad. But still, it didn't help his case. He had less points than Jamal Williams in week 7. But it was running back 16 for Jamal Williams through 6 weeks. So yeah, Jamal Williams was better, but he was very much that I don't really want to play this guy, but he ended up in some situations where you could because of injuries, and he was just producing, getting those red zone touchdowns, and he's going to continue to do that. He's not going to be our overall waiver wire winner. I'm not expecting him to be our overall waiver wire winner for the end of the season, but for now, first half, you kind of cash in somebody who's helped you through so far.
All right, and that wraps up our midseason fantasy awards. Let us know who you would have given the awards to. But before we get out of here, let's do our Thursday night preview.
Thursday Night Football in Week 8 will feature the Baltimore Ravens traveling to the struggling Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And just last week, I was talking about how the Buccaneers are getting healthy. Here we are again, where not only is Cameron Brate missing practice still as he missed the game last week, but Mike Evans did not practice, Julio Jones did not practice, and Russell Gage did not practice on Monday. So, here we are again, looking at who could play for the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers struggling in general. There might be limited on who you even want to play. I'll just go ahead and name me the guys who you are confident in going against a pretty tough Ravens defense on Thursday.
Mike Evans. I know he's DNP, but he's the guy that even if he doesn't practice, I would still play him. We've seen this before. He doesn't practice, goes out, catches 3 touchdowns. Like, if he's out there, he's in your lineup. Other than that, like, you're probably don't love it, but you probably have to play Leonard Fournette, even though you're like, if there's a way I don't have to, you look elsewhere. If you do need a, tight end streamer and you're just not in love with the options, Cade Otton, the rookie last week, he did have 4 receptions for, 64 yards. He didn't find the end zone, but that's still finished him as tight end 10. So you get, 5 targets. That's not bad for a tight end these days. So that's potential streaming option for the Buccaneers. I'm not playing Tom Brady this week. He just seems off, whether it's Father Time, what he's reportedly going through, and he just can't focus completely on football, is to be determined. But that's it for the Buccaneers, and we'll see if those words of we hit rock bottom can turn around, like Todd Bowles said. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it is, very common for the home team to have a pretty big advantage when it comes to Thursday Night Football in terms of who wins the game. So that's a good sign for the Buccaneers, but it's not a great sign for what we're expecting from their offensive output for your fantasy team.
No, honestly, I think if the Buccaneers win this game, they probably still win this game scoring 20 points or less, which is not great for your fantasy team, as you said. And I did actually have to go back and just talk about bye weeks for next week. There's only two teams, but it's the Chiefs and the Chargers. So pretty heavy teams to have on bye. It's good there's only two in that week, but especially at the tight end position, if you're somebody who's been leaning on Gerald Everett, who's kind of been a nice little sleeper guy, who's been in your lineup most weeks, or if you're someone who has our first half MVP, Travis Kelce, you could do worse than Kate Otten off of the wire, but it's going to be a touchdown dependent thing, just as pretty much everybody in the tight end position is going to be. But I'm with you with you're playing Evans if he plays. It's just how it works. And you're playing most likely Leonard Fournette. And other than that, that's it for the Buccaneers. Moving on to the Ravens side, their injury report on Monday had Mark Andrews as it did not practice. He was also on their injury report last week and went up to play. He just did not look like himself last week. And then Gus Edwards was limited, but I think that's just them kind of limiting his snaps as he's just coming off of the injury. And he did just have a fairly heavy workload now going into a work week. A short week. I would not be shocked if Edwards is limited participant all week and then still goes out there and gets a full workload.
Yeah, I like Edwards this week. And I'm playing Mark Andrews if he plays. He's too valuable of a tight end to not going to get cute and play K. Otten over Mark Andrews. No, Mark Andrews is going to play.
No.
Yes, Edwards. I think he'd be a great fill-in if you're the Austin Eckler owner. Like, if you need a guy, I think you can put him out in your lineup. If you have two solid running backs, if you have, a Saquon Barkley and I forget the name I was just about to say, but a guy of, similar value in Saquon or something like that, you don't have to rush out and play Gus Edwards. But I think he is a viable option if you would need it.
I'm with you there. When it goes to the wide receiver position for the Ravens, that's always been a tough one, and they have cooled down a lot as a passing offense in recent weeks. But Rashad Bateman returned to action. He led the team in targets with 5, and he had 4 catches for 42 yards this past week against Cleveland. I think if you have to play a wide receiver on that side, it's him or bust. Like, Duvernay is out of the conversation for now. But I'm definitely trying to look elsewhere at the wide receiver position. I don't know if you differ at all.
Nope, I'm with you. And then, of course, the no-brainer is you're playing Lamar Jackson.
That's pretty much it. I think that wraps up Ravens Buccaneers. Unless you have something else here to add, you can cut me off.
Nope, I think that wraps it up. It was a fun show. It was good to be back. I will see, or you guys will hear me in a couple weeks when I am back on the podcast. But as always, thanks for listening. I know Tyler wasn't here, but he wanted me to tell you that this podcast is more fun for us and more fun for you when you get involved.
Yes, Cody, and thank you all one more time for listening into the Couch GMs podcast. Look forward to seeing you in a few weeks, slightly tanner, potentially. But for Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kurth, and we will see you all later in the week.